The Battle of Chancellorsville, Lee's genius, Jackson's fall, and Hooker's missed opportunity. Imagine this. It's the spring of 1863, and Washington, D.C. is a city under siege, not by Confederate cannons, but by chaos. The Union is licking its wounds after a series of humiliating defeats, and the political scene in the capital is, well, a mess. President Abraham Lincoln, always looking more haggard with every new battle report, is under tremendous pressure. His critics, some even within his own cabinet, are circling like vultures over a battlefield. Let's be clear. Washington in 1863 was less city upon a hill and more a political minefield. The whispers behind closed doors? Not kind. Lincoln's own cabinet had become a nest of critics. Secretary of the Treasury Salmon P. Chase, for one, fancied himself more suited for the presidency than Lincoln. Chase didn't hide his disdain for Lincoln's leadership, and he quietly plotted against him while still serving in his cabinet, a classic case of keep your enemies closer. Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton, the Bulldog, wasn't quite a conspirator, but his abrasive manner made working relationships tough. And let's not forget Secretary of State William Seward, who believed that everything could be solved with diplomacy, even in a civil war. Amid all this political jostling, Lincoln was desperate for a military win. The recent disaster at Fredericksburg still weighed heavily on him and the Union Army. Fredericksburg. Let's rewind a little to that catastrophe. In December 1862, General Ambrose Burnside had led the Union Army to one of its most humiliating defeats. It wasn't just a loss, it was a spectacle of failure. Burnside, sporting the world's most iconic mutton chops, seriously, look it up, had marched his army directly into Confederate positions atop Marye's Heights, where General Robert E. Lee had his men dug in behind a stone wall. Burnside ordered wave after wave of Union soldiers to charge, and wave after wave they were mowed down. Over 12,000 Union men fell that day. It was like watching someone bang their head against a brick wall, repeatedly. After this fiasco, Lincoln was in dire need of fresh leadership, someone who could take the fight to Lee without marching straight into a massacre. And so, into the scene bursts Major General Joseph Hooker, or Fighting Joe as he was popularly known. Hooker had a reputation, brash, bold, and not exactly shy about tooting his own horn. He was the kind of general who made other officers nervous, not because of his tactics, but because of his mouth. And boy, could he talk. He once boasted, "I am not afraid of anything except God, and I think even he's a little nervous about me." But let's get to know Joe Hooker a bit better. Born into a New England family, Hooker was every bit the son of that region's hard-nosed, puritanical stock. After graduating from West Point in 1837, he served in the Mexican-American War, where he earned a reputation as a fearless leader and a bit of a rogue. His problem? Insubordination. He openly criticized his superior officers, including General Winfield Scott, the man who basically wrote the book on 19th-century warfare. Hooker's habit of speaking his mind and defying authority was legendary. Once, when asked about his personal boldness, Hooker chuckled and said, "Boldness? Hell, it's just common sense when everyone else is too scared to do it." Despite his occasional arrogance, Hooker's military talent couldn't be denied. His troops loved him, mostly because Hooker had a habit of keeping morale high by ensuring his men were well-fed and well-equipped. In fact, Fighting Joe may have invented modern military logistics just by caring whether his soldiers were happy. So when Lincoln, weary of generals who wouldn't take the fight to the enemy, offered Hooker command of the Army of the Potomac, Hooker didn't hesitate. With a broad grin and a swagger, Hooker took the reins and immediately started talking smack. His famous line? "My plans are perfect, and when I start to carry them out, may God have mercy on General Lee, for I will have none." Bold words indeed, considering that Robert E. Lee, the Confederate general, was already famous for making Union generals look like amateurs. Hooker was a man of action, and his plan for the upcoming campaign was audacious, even brilliant, at least on paper. Rather than launch a direct attack on Lee, which had been the Union's doomed strategy at Fredericksburg, Hooker decided to outflank him. The idea was simple: hit Lee where he least expected it. Instead of pounding against Lee's entrenched forces, Hooker would lead his army westward, cross the Rappahannock River, and strike Lee from behind at a place called Chancellorsville. a tiny hamlet in Virginia surrounded by a dense forest known ominously as the Wilderness. And so, with great fanfare, Hooker set his army in motion. His Army of the Potomac was massive, nearly 130,000 men strong compared to Lee's 60,000. Hooker had the advantage in manpower, artillery, and logistics. In his mind, the battle was already won. He even issued an order to his army that practically declared victory before the fighting even started. The operations of the last 3 days have determined that our enemy must either ingloriously flee or come out from behind their defenses and give us battle on our own ground. Hooker wasn't just confident, he was practically giddy. On April 30, 1863, Hooker's forces began crossing the Rappahannock with precision and speed. The sight was something to behold. Columns of blue-clad soldiers, artillery caissons, and supply wagons snaking their way over hastily built pontoon bridges. The men sang as they crossed the river, filled with a sense of impending triumph. Hooker himself rode among them, a swagger in his step and a gleam in his eye, shouting encouragement. Hooker's corps commanders, Generals John Sedgwick, George Meade, and Oliver O. Howard, were all seasoned soldiers, though not without their doubts about Hooker's brash confidence. Sedgwick, a stoic New Englander, privately remarked, "Hooker's arrogance will be his undoing. The Lord does not look kindly on those who assume victory before it's earned." Hooker wasn't worried. He had Sedgwick's VI's corps, making a feint toward Fredericksburg, while his main force converged on Chancellorsville. The plan was to catch Lee in a pincer movement, with Sedgwick attacking from the east while Hooker struck from the west. If everything went smoothly, Lee would be trapped between two Union forces, outnumbered and outgunned. But Robert E. Lee was not a man to panic. Even when his scouts reported Hooker's massive force closing in from multiple directions, Lee remained calm. He knew Hooker had the numbers, but Lee had something more important: boldness. And Lee wasn't afraid to gamble. Hooker had amassed over 130,000 Union soldiers to Lee's 60,000, an overwhelming advantage by any stretch of military imagination. But as they say, pride comes before the fall, and Hooker's campaign was about to turn into one long, chaotic tumble. On the other side, General Robert E. Lee, with his trademark calm and calculated demeanor, was contemplating a counter-move so bold it bordered on madness. After all, it wasn't every day a commander split his already outnumbered army in the face of a numerically superior foe. But Lee, never one to follow the rulebook, had something up his sleeve: General Thomas Stonewall Jackson. Old Jack, as some affectionately called him, was Lee's right-hand man, the kind of general who could lead his troops through fire and brimstone with nothing more than a cold stare. And that's exactly what Lee was about to ask of him. "General Jackson," Lee murmured, staring at the map before him, "take your corps, 28,000 men, and march around Hooker's flank. But remember, stealth is everything. Move like a shadow, and strike with the force of a thunderclap." Jackson, his face a mask of iron, simply nodded. "They shall not see us coming." Before dawn, Jackson set off, leading his men on a 12-mile flanking maneuver through the dense, tangled woods of the Wilderness, a nightmarish forest so thick it seemed to swallow whole armies. But Jackson's troops marched with a sense of purpose, their bayonets glinting in the faint morning light that struggled to pierce the canopy above. As they moved, the soldiers maintained a tense silence, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant sound of Union campfires. Somewhere out there, Hooker's right flank was waiting, completely oblivious to the storm about to descend on them. Suddenly, Jackson's column encountered a slight hiccup: a group of Union scouts. The startled Yankees, wide-eyed at the sight of Confederate troops pouring through the trees, turned and bolted before Jackson could order them shot. "We've been spotted," one of Jackson's aides muttered nervously. But old Jack was unfazed. "Press on," he commanded. "There's no time to waste." Meanwhile, General Hooker, unaware of the Confederates sneaking through the trees, was relaxing at his headquarters. He had spent much of the day riding along the Union lines, his confidence growing by the hour. Hooker's lieutenants, like General Oliver O. Howard, were preparing their men for what they thought would be an easy victory. It was then that one of Hooker's officers approached with news. "General, our scouts report movement in the woods." Hooker waved him off dismissively. "Let Lee come. he said with a smirk, sipping from his cup of coffee. "He'll break his army against these lines." Oh, how wrong he was. By late afternoon, Jackson had finally reached his target. He peered through the underbrush and saw before him the Union's one corps, completely unaware and utterly unprepared. Some Union soldiers were eating dinner, others were dozing off in the spring sun, rifles stacked neatly in pyramids. Jackson's cold blue eyes flickered. This was it. The moment. "Now, gentlemen," he said, his voice low but firm, "let's crush them." The rebel yell split the air as Jackson's men surged from the woods like a human wave. Panic erupted in the Union ranks. One private later recalled, "The Rebs came out of nowhere. We were frying bacon one minute, running for our lives the next." Officers tried to rally their men, but the rout was on. Union soldiers fled in all directions, many without even grabbing their rifles. At Hooker's headquarters, confusion reigned. A Union courier burst in, breathless. "General, the right flank is collapsing." Hooker, rattled but not yet undone, ordered reinforcements to shore up the line. But it was too late. Jackson's men were rolling through the Union positions like a tidal wave. As night fell, Jackson, emboldened by the success of the attack, decided to press forward. He rode out with a small contingent of staff officers to scout the Union position for another assault. But in the darkness and confusion, tragedy struck. Confederate pickets, thinking they had spotted Union cavalry, opened fire. Jackson was hit. 3 bullets, one of them shattering his left arm. General A.P. Hill rushed to Jackson's side, his voice shaking. "General, are you all right?" Jackson, ever stoic, simply nodded. "It is a mere scratch. Help me off my horse." His men carried him to the rear, where surgeons hastily amputated his arm. General Jeb Stuart, hearing the news, took over command of Jackson's corps, determined to finish what his friend had started. Lee was devastated by the news. "He has lost his left arm," Lee remarked solemnly, "but I have lost my right." Jackson's wounding would prove fatal. He died a week later of pneumonia, a tragic loss for the Confederate cause. The next morning, May 3rd, Lee continued his assault. With Jackson out of the fight, General Stuart led the Confederate charge with unrelenting fury. Hooker, stationed at a house being used as his headquarters, watched the unfolding disaster in disbelief. His confidence had crumbled, but his stubbornness remained. A cannonball struck a nearby pillar, knocking Hooker unconscious. When he came to, dazed and confused, his head pounded. "I'm fine," he muttered, though he was anything but. He refused to relinquish command, even as his generals, including General Daniel Butterfield, pleaded with him to step down. One Union officer later remarked, "Hooker was beaten by his own paralysis of will." Meanwhile, Union General John Sedgwick, who had been ordered to attack Lee's rear at Fredericksburg, was having a rough go of it. His men managed to break through Confederate lines, but were soon repelled by Lee's reinforcements. Sedgwick's failure was the final nail in the coffin for the Union. By May 6th, Hooker had seen enough. He ordered his army to retreat across the Rappahannock River, leaving behind 17,000 Union casualties. Lee's army had suffered 13,000 losses, a heavy price, but Chancellorsville was a decisive Confederate victory. The South was jubilant, but the celebration was bittersweet. Stonewall Jackson, the Confederacy's greatest asset, was gone. As Hooker sulked in defeat, he reflected bitterly, "The enemy is driven back, and I sit here a failure." It was only a matter of weeks before President Lincoln, ever pragmatic, replaced Hooker with General George Meade. The stage was now set for the fateful Battle of Gettysburg. For Lee, though victorious, Chancellorsville would forever be a bittersweet triumph, a moment of brilliance overshadowed by the irreplaceable loss of Jackson. And so, the Battle of Chancellorsville passed into history, a tragic tale of genius, hubris, and the chaos of war. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into American